Perfect. Bonjour, or as we say in KONG Land, Kong morning to everyone, despite the fact that it's afternoon. It's Kong morning somewhere. So today I'm going to be talking about KONG Land, which is a network state which is focused on connecting physical and digital. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that means, but specifically we care about bringing the same kinds of property rights that we all know and understand with ERC 721s and ERC 20s into the physical realm and creating standards around that so that when you interact with physical goods, you can have similar guarantees. So I always like to start with thinking about how we arrived at this point and sort of the progression of the narrative since we've been working on physical crypto in this space. I think a lot of people have sort of experienced the story of crypto as a scam. You know, it doesn't have any value. This was especially a big narrative in 2017, 2018. And then they say, well, you know, only physical stuff has value. You know, only the things in my closet or the rings that I wear, the jewelry or my cars, only those have value. NFTs, you know, these things are worthless. And then eventually start to have this emergence, this last cycle here in the last year or so, where people say, oh, well, actually, we see how NFTs will be everything. NFTs have incredible value, and obviously my Bored Apes and my punks and so forth will be worth a lot. And what we like to see is things aren't either physical or digital in terms of ownership, that really the way we are as humans, we interact in the real world. We don't live on computers entirely. And therefore, we believe that the metaverse and this concept of digital property rights is going to be pervasive around us. And that we need to have things that are connected to the digital side of things and digital property rights to establish that. So I'm going to go through a brief history of Kong. I'm sure a few folks in the room may have heard of Kong, but just a little bit of background of where we started, which was with a single question: what if crypto were more like cash? And the idea behind that is cash is a really easy instrument for everyone to use. You know, I can tell my dad about crypto. He's heard of Bitcoin and Ethereum, but for him to actually go spend it from a wallet in a non-custodial way is very difficult. And we said, well, if crypto were like cash, I could pass him a cash instrument, which is also known as a bearer instrument, and then he would be the holder or the owner of that crypto. And then maybe at some point in the time down in the future when he's ready, he can take the digital currency off of the physical and transact via a wallet on his mobile phone, but only when he's ready to onboard to such a process. Cash is understandable by billions of people. You know, little kids know how to use cash, elderly know how to use cash, people who are outside the traditional financial system use cash. The transactions are instantly final, you don't have to wait for block times. You have anonymity, you don't have any direct costs, there are no gas fees. And it has a very clear UX that if you destroy or lose a note or a bill, it's gone. As opposed to if you accidentally give someone a copy of your private key, obviously in that case, you know, it's unclear, someone has to race to claim the funds on chain. We went through this whole exploration. We said, okay, this is an interesting goal. What are all the examples before this? And there'd been things like Cassatius coins, which was a Bitcoin coin back in 2013, 2012. People had made printed QR codes. And the challenge with all these things were that basically if you print a private key on a piece of paper and you pass it along, someone will eventually copy the private key, and then the paper is worthless because they can just go behind the scenes and spend the funds. Then we looked at existing hardware wallets. We had a background in hardware manufacturing, and we said, let's take a look at, you know, the state of the art here, ledgers and trezors. And despite the cost, really the biggest problem is complexity. You have a very complex system with a very large surface area for attacks. So ledgers or trezors have hundreds of thousands, or not millions of lines of code executing on them, which means there's more opportunity for bugs and hacks to come in and steal funds. So even if you can make a ledger or trezor, you know, incredibly cheaply, it didn't really make sense for the solution. And so what we landed on for Kong notes, and here's our favorite render, but you know, I have a couple still up here from 2019, is a series of a few different features that we put together. Obviously, a Kong Cash note has a printed face value, so it's like any currency around the world. You understand intuitively what it is. This is 100 Kong. The Kong token has no value, but if it did, you'd know what that value was. The second piece is a secure element chip. So there's a specialized chip on here. And the reason why it's worth noting, because it's the whole focus of the work we've done since then, is that it can generate its own private key without releasing it, and it can generate signatures from that. So the implication is we as the manufacturer don't have the private key. You as the holder don't have the private key, but this note can generate messages or attestations of authenticity, and you can verify them using the public key. The same way that a wallet works, you generate signatures, someone else can verify them. The other two components are a smart contract and a time lock. So we couple the public key in a smart contract, and then we deposit the KONG token. So altogether, it means that we have this note that you can pass around, you can spend it, and then after an expiration date, you're capable of pulling the digital token off, and the physical note is just a collectible. It doesn't have any value at that point in time. So what it boils down to when we think about sort of trust in crypto and property rights is that it's trust in how you hold the keys. And so getting people more familiar, easy UX to hold keys allows us to imbue any physical property around us with this notion of creating it into a crypto asset. And so a year ago at ECC, we took this idea of the KONG cash note and we opened it up to generalize it to any kind of thing. So rather than just focusing on fungible tokens, we said, let's take the secure chip tech and let's give it to all sorts of creators and put it into all sorts of different things. And the structure that we decided to do that with was KONG Land. So KONG Land is a network state, as I mentioned earlier on, focused on building this. It's open to any participants. And it takes this idea of this hardware lock contract, as we call it, and extends it to say, okay, rather than just money, let's put this into identity, art, merchandise. So KONG Land structurally as a DAO, and I'll just go through this pretty quickly, is we have this idea of let's take in secure chips, let's take in these physical components, and let's export out, fashion, identity products, art, merch, all sorts of things that people can have. We are run by a set of citizens. I'm Citizen 48, and all the citizens participate in the governance of KONG Land in a democratic way and sort of voting on proposals, designing projects, and creating things. The KONG exports is obviously the biggest thing as a network state. So when you think about the functions of a state, you think about how does the state generate revenue from tax, or what are the things that a country is rich in? And we said, well, KONG has this unique technology, so let's go export it to other DAOs, companies, and projects. And we've had a lot of different projects that we've worked with. So for instance, MetaFactory we've been working with for the last couple of years now. They're one of the favorite groups that we have. And they've done some incredible integrations with the chips. In this case, they recently did a drop with the Kraus House, which is a DAO focused on buying a basketball team. And so they have a chip down here integrated into their shirt. And the question is, what does that add to a physical item like this piece of merchandise? And while it does give you some level of authenticity, you can sign the chip, you can get information from it, there's way more that Kraus House wants to do with it. They want to say, okay, in the same way that you go play a crypto game on network and you interact with different elements of the game, you get signatures, likewise, someone wearing a Kraus House jersey can attend a physical basketball game and they can interact with players. And rather than having the player sign their shirt using a marker, they can now digitally sign their shirt by tapping on the chip. And so just really exploring this idea space of what a physical chip brings you. Ethereum is another project that we've worked with for a long time. Their idea is bringing collectibles and existing things onto the blockchain. So in the case of Ethereum here, they did a Shatner collectible, and we put a chip under William Shatner's signature. Pretty straightforward, but again, the idea being there's all sorts of collectibles out there. We can start to put a chip on it, and then we can turn it into a physical NFT. Larp is perhaps one of the most interesting examples that we've seen thus far, because they're really exploring the space of NFT gaming, but not digital gaming. They're exploring physical gaming. So Larp has created these very realistic foam and plastic weapons where they actually want to go and conduct a LARP, or a live action role play event, where people engage in physical fights using the weapons, and they scan the chips before and after the gameplay. So, what does this really enable beyond a traditional LARP? The main thing is you can start to trace your actual gameplay on-chain because you've cryptographically identified the other player. So you tap the phone to their weapon. Here at the end, you can see the chip. You tap the phone to their weapon prior to engaging in a battle. They tap their phone. And you can continue the quest even after the LARP is completed. So they have this sort of seamless in-world, out-of-world metaverse interaction. And so Loot LARP is also organizing, I believe as a DAO, really cool project and really novel use of the chips. So RxTX Studio, again, in terms of thinking about chips, is got a really radical idea. Their idea is they're selling physical 3D print files. Each one is a unique geometric pattern, which is generative, that then you can go take to a 3D printer, in this case a lampshade, print out your custom lampshade, and attach one of the chips to it so that you can then authenticate that that is in fact the NFT that you purchased and you're the sole owner of the lampshade. So it has this really interesting relationship with a good that you've never had before. So typically you go to IKEA, you buy a lampshade, you own that lampshade until it falls apart or you move. In the case of RxTX, they're saying, no, you own the actual IP to the creation of that specific lampshade. And you have the rights to make this unique geometric pattern because it's generative. And so in theory, you could burn the lampshade, print off another one, and you're the only one who can own the original authentic IP. So really just incredibly radical idea. Here they demoed AR, so you can view the lampshade before you actually go and print it off. Textile is another example which is kind of similar to Ethereum, where they're tagging high fashion items using the chips, a little bit more conventional, but basically demonstrating that you can put these chips into anything that's from $5 to $5,000. Bongland is another one of my favorite examples. Bongland is done by a high-end glass blower, so he sells very high-end glass blown pieces for $5,000 to $20,000 US. Each piece takes him, can take him weeks at a time. And this is his EIP 1559 burn, or 1559 bong, which is all about the burn. And in this case, he worked out a way to embed the chip in the bottom of the bong under an epoxy resin. So typically, if you were to try and add a chip while you're blowing glass, it's a very high temperature, you'd melt it, but it looks completely seamless. And with him, the exploration is, okay, you have these special objects out in the world, whether it's a sculpture, piece of art, in this case, the bong, and you can have a trace that you've interacted with it. So sort of like a POAP, but you can actually do some more interactions to prove that, maybe you took a puff from the Bongland bong, or at least you saw it in person. On-Chain Records is a fascinating project who's really exploring, the idea of music NFTs, but well beyond the idea of just ownership. So in this case, they actually press their own vinyl records, and they're adding the chips to the LPs. And so there's a lot of really interesting things that this brings you. It gives the artists another revenue flow. So a lot of artists over the last few years have actually made more money on things like LPs and concerts and merch as opposed to plays on Spotify. And so this gives another way so that you can have an artist who's making music NFTs to sell a physical. You can do really interesting dynamics where you link the LP such that maybe you have a record player that's only enabled to play it if you're the owner. So you have really, really creative stuff going on. And there's also an AR component to his records. So he recently started selling these with the chips in them. Again, all of the cutting edge NFT stuff, you can think of cutting edge NFTs plus a physical component. Lastly, Cabin DAO, which a lot of folks here may have heard of. They have creator cabins where they're bringing people out into the Texas wilderness to go live and work and build the space. Like KONG Land, we actually are offering them passports. And so one of the cool things is They have creator cabin passports, but they're really pushing the idea of what does this physical get you as a creator cabin member. So in KONG Land, we issued passports. We haven't done too much with them. With creator cabins, they're really exploring like, hey, we can use this for access control. Fairly simple, but it makes a ton of sense if you have a DAO who starts to own a bunch of different physical property in different parts of the world, having a credential that lets you tap in and gives you access to the cabin if that's what you have for that moment in time makes sense. So we have a few more passport projects in the works with other DAOs. We really like working with other DAOs and helping to bring this physical component to them. I think a lot of people might say, that's anachronistic. Why would I want a physical card when we're moving to smartphones? But in the case of a DAO where you're a contributing member and you're really participating, sometimes having a physical token gives you a stronger link to them. And so maybe you switch between your smartphone and the card. And of course, in the case of the card, if you need to unlock your door when your phone has died, you can still get in. So to date, since my last talk last year, we've shipped over 20,000 chips across like different kinds of projects. Again, we really love working with DAOs especially, but also different sorts of companies. We're really looking to scale that up through the end of this year and into next year. The chip shortage was quite a challenge for us. However, we managed to release our next generation product, which is the Halo chip. So the Halo chip, and I've got one here on stage, is really cool. It's pretty basic. It's small and round, but it's really resilient. We saw a lot of projects putting chips into things like garments and clothing, and it has to go through the wash. And so this does much better than our previous generation chip, which would start to fall apart. The other really cool thing about the Halo chip is it doesn't require a dedicated app. So when we start to think about, okay, physical chips connecting to on-chain stuff, you have all of these components in between. You have Google and Apple who can start to control you. And we said, no, we want to do everything via the browser so Google and Apple can never shut us down. So in the case of these chips, you can interact with them via Safari and Chrome natively. You don't need a dedicated app. Which I know I'm running low on time here, so I'll move quickly to the last piece here, which leads us to the on-chain portion, which is the Ethereum Reality Service. And we announced that earlier this year at ETH Denver. And the idea is it's an open protocol for chip manufacturers, brands, creators, so that we can resolve chips to smart contracts. So really quickly, in the case of KONG, we built a very bespoke system to do this. In the case of ERS, we have a fully custom, open way in which you can resolve chips to contracts. I won't go into the details here, but I will say, if anyone's interested, we have a post up on ETH Magicians now. It's a proposal which we're going to roll into an EIP pretty soon. We would love everyone's feedback on what they would like to do with chips, how they think about chips interacting with contracts, and most importantly, we're trying to bring in other chip manufacturers as well, and obviously make it a public good for everyone to participate in. So thanks, everyone. My belief is we need usable self-sovereign crypto with an easy-to-use UX. And take a look at ers.to if you want to learn more about the Ethereum Reality Service. Thanks a lot.
We can have one quick question with one quick answer. If someone wants to say something. Oh, that's okay. Yeah?
How expensive are these chips?
So depending on the volume, the chips range from a few dollars to $10, but we're trying to get the cost down. I would say in medium volumes, you'll look at something around $5 or less. Awesome. I'd be happy to answer questions outside as well. Thank you.